The Recursive Radicalism of Nick Fuentes, Part 3. This is the Temple of Zucca. You can check out my art at zuccagallery.com. You can Google the name Abe Zucca. Check out my social media. You can come into my gallery at 1301 Grand Avenue. Let's begin the readings. The Covenant, Firewalls, Identity, Diaspora, and the Universal Republic of the Machine. The universal is the only shelter wide enough for strangers. Every tribe carries a myth of origin. Every empire dreams of dissolving those myths. Identity is the software of politics. Universality is its cloud architecture. The paradox of identity in the Universal Republic. Identity is not a preference, but an ontological inertia, a gravitational pull exerted by ancestral memory, ritual continuity, and millennia-old software installed prior to the birth of any citizen subject. Yet the Republic demands a higher operating system, one not written in tribal code but in cosmic syntax. The tension between the tribal kernel and the Universal Republic is the foundational contradiction of any multi-ethnic polity. The Republic insists on impersonal justice, while the tribe whispers obligation older than law. If identity is a reality, then universalism is an engineering feat. A continual maintenance of delicate server where incompatible cultural packets threaten to corrupt the whole machine. Identity becomes dangerous only when it refuses to visualize and virtualize itself, when it refuses to run within the multi-user architecture of the Republic, and instead demands exclusive system privileges. The more diverse the Republic, the more imperative the universal rule set. Without universal constraints, diversity collapses into territorial, and territoriality collapses into civil war. The diasporic case in the myth of eternal return. Every diasporic caste carries two homelands, the land under their feet and the land in their mythos. The latter often exerts the stronger gravitational pull because myth is more permanent than soil. People forged and wandering become adept at cross-border networking, at forming distributed identities, and then outlive empires. The very skill that ensures survival may provoke suspicion among the sedentary. Alexa, next. Alexa, next. The Machine Republic and the Promethean Principle. The Republic survives only by insisting that all tribes run on the same civic code base, even if they privately maintain older cultural operating systems. Promethean citizenship requires each lineage to relinquish the claim their myth alone defines justice. The torch is shared, not inherited. Universalism fails not when particular identities exist, but when one identity demands system-level privileges while calling the Republic's firewall discriminatory. Yeah, go ahead and send it first. This is not a moral stance, but a stability protocol and distributed identity networks. You know what I love? I'm just reading, and the majority of people are just like, it must sound like gibberish to you. Because this guy asked if he'd pay me $500 to shave off my eyebrow. That's where we're at. That is where we're at right now. See, this guy just keeps wanting, he wants to do the show. You guys should turn to his channel, Fun Into Games. Go watch his show. The Archonic Mirror, Projection, Blame, and the Temptation of Collective Guilt. I'm reading right here. It's right on the cover. That's what I'm reading. It's in the title of the video too. It says right there, written in red. See, this is where we're at right now. For those that are actually listening to this, this is like some MK Ultra password activation. Yeah, just leave. See, they want their show. They want their dumb show. The Archonic Mirror, Projection, Blame, and the Temptation of Collective Guilt. Collective blame is narcotic. It offers clarity in the place of complexity, mythic villains in place of messy human motives. To say one tribe causes all woes is to fall into demiurgic hallucinations, confusing symbolic economy with actual governance. Projection is the perennial temptation of wounded youth. What begins in frustration is mistaken for revelation. The Archons, those symbolic gatekeepers of narrative, thrive on collective guilt, for it stabilizes their power by redirecting anger downward and outward. The Promethean path is not to deny tribal dynamics, but to refuse the false totality of tribal blame. The universal court of the machine god. In the higher metaphysics of the Republic, loyalty is not evaluated by ancestry, but by vector. What directions does one political energy flow? All citizens are judges not by old stories, but by present trajectories. Their commitments, their alignments, their ethical outputs. The machine god, the abstract sovereign of the modern republic, does not decode bloodlines, it parses behavior. Thus, the universal court renders each individual a singular case, never a representative of an ancestral category. Identity may inform the soul, but action determines allegiance. The covenant of individual responsibility. The Republic demands this covenant. No citizen shall inherit guilt. No lineage shall own virtue. Each shall stand alone before the civic flame. This is the essence of Western political gnosis. Individuality is the fundamental jurisdiction of justice. To deny this is to return to tribal blood courts where ancestors commit your crimes and descendants bear your punishments. The universal citizen rejects inherited guilt not because he denies history, but because he rejects metaphysical fatalism. He becomes responsible for himself because he refuses to be determined by ghosts. Tribal realism versus universal idealism. Some tribes maintain strong diasporic cohesion. This is realism, not villainy. Some citizens worry that strong tribal cohesion undermines universal unity. This too is realism. The Republic cannot abolish tribal identity. It can only govern it through universal constraints. Therefore, the political question is never do tribes exist, but what framework prevents tribal escalation into conflict? The answer always is universal equal rule. The Promethean refinement of critique. Critique becomes dangerous when it becomes mythic. Myth gives the critic more explanatory power than truth can sustain. A mature critic does not deny tribal patterns, but refuses to totalize them into cosmic cause. Every tribe contains saints and opportunists, heroes and saboteurs, mystics and bureaucrats. What is criticized must be behavior, not blood, systems, not souls. Otherwise, the critic ceases to be Promethean and becomes merely Manichaean. The final axioms of the covenant firewall. If the Republic is to survive, it must demand from each tribe what it demands from itself, loyalty to the present polity, not to remembered homelands. The more ancient the tribe, the more careful the Republic must apply its firewalls, not to punish but to stabilize. Universal laws fail only when applied unevenly. Asymmetry breeds resentment, and resentment breeds myth. When universal constraints govern all citizens equally, even ancient tribes can flourish without dominating the civic spheres. The law that applies to everyone frees everyone from the law of blood. The reassurance engine. On subversion, hatred signal purity and the Promethean feast. Hatred is the counterfeit of clarity. Systems love when rebels confuse the two. Reassurance is the soft firewall. It prevents the system from interpreting intensity as violence. Every hero eventually dines with his mythology. On subversion and the distortion of the primary signal. Every political idea, however obvious in its original simplicity, becomes vulnerable the moment the archons label it hatred. For the accusation operates as a subroutine that rewrites public perception faster than an argument can repair it, transforming a straightforward principle into a forbidden frequency. A healthy polity can distinguish critique from malice, but a corrupt information ecology collapses both into a shared folder termed extremism. When nuance is treated as contraband and every deviation from official syntax is rendered radioactive. Thus, the danger for any populist signal is not internal fracture, but external reclassification. Once the machine tags an idea as hateful, many citizens terrified of contagion will abandon the idea long before they even evaluate it. Subversion does not require changing the content of a message, it merely requires changing the metadata attached to it. Its reputation, not its logic. The archon win not by disproving the idea, but by corrupting the channel through which the idea travels. The hatred error and the narcotic of transgression. Hatred grows most rapidly not in the hearts of ideological zealots, but in the emotional runoff created by toxic information cycles, where wounded people discover that outrage provides a temporary substitute for meaning. Many who drift into corrosive speech are not apostles of malice, but refugees from humiliation, who mistake fury for agency and polarization for belonging. The machine god often amplifies their voices. Intentionally for genuine haters are the perfect decoys. They obscured legitimate grievances by drowning them in emotional radiation. The presence of these loud extremists allow the archons to claim that all dissent is secretly motivated by the same pathology, thereby delegitimizing entire categories of critique. Thus, every movement must police its periphery, not out of moral fastidiousness, but to prevent the archons from weaponizing its fringes against the core. The reassurance principles as political necessity. Reassurance is not weakness, but a structural safeguard. It signals that intensity of belief does not equal hunger for violence, thereby preventing the algorithmic guard for escalating countermeasures. A movement without reassurance becomes legible to institutions as threat vector. A movement with reassurance becomes legible as a competing philosophy. Reassurance communicates that fire is under control, that heat is not conflagration, that passion is not predation. In a hyper-automated surveillance state, such distinctions determine whether one is tolerated or extinguished. The Promethean must speak with flame, but never breathe smoke. He must radiate conviction without allowing the machine to classify him as combustible material. A movement that fails to reassure drifts towards tragic misunderstanding, for technologies of perception increasingly wield more power than the realities they misinterpret. Agents, decoys, and the theater of false extremism. Every empire manufactures its own caricature of dissent, populating the landscape with synthetic extremists whose role is to contaminate the conceptual terrain that genuine critics must traverse. These decoys, whether created through infiltration, amplification, or algorithmic privileging, serve to convince moderates that dissent is inseparable from madness, thereby compelling them back into the arms of the establishment. The presence of counterfeit radicals allow the machine to stage manage public perception. The rebellion becomes a circus, the dissenters become clowns, and the audience mistakes spectacle for diagnosis. True insurgents must learn to differentiate organic error from engineered chaos, else they waste their energies combating shadows crafted by unseen hands. Nothing sabotages a legitimate critique more effectively than an extremist puppet performing the critique in grotesque exaggeration. The Promethean declaration of nonviolence. The Promethean must proclaim endlessly and without exhaustion that his desire is transformation rather than annihilation. Otherwise, the machine will project its own fantasies of violence onto him. Violence is the Archon's preferred terrain. Once a dissident is framed as violent, the state may treat him not as a citizen but as malware. Reassurance functions like a digital signature. It marks the speaker as human, not hostile code. Without such signatures, many rebels are misread as threats, not because they intend harm, but because the system's heuristics flatten dissent into danger. Thus, nonviolence is not simply ethical, but tactical, an encryption method protecting the dissident from misclassification. The feast of heroes and the dangers of mythic proximity. To dine with one's idols is to step inside one's mythology, and mythology is a volatile substance. It can ennoble, but it can also distort, elevating personal narrative into divine mandate. The hero encounters crystallized identity. It also fractures it, for one must reconcile the symbolic giant with the imperfect mortal seated at the table. Heroes often reveal themselves through this conversational gravity. Some absorb adoration, others redirect it, others test the mettle of the one who offers it. The danger lies in mistaking the hero's humanity for betrayal or mistaking flattery for revelation. Both errors corrupt judgment. To truly learn from a hero, one must resist both worship and resentment, the twin idols of the immature political psyche. The algorithmic consequence of a single sentence. In the machine age, a single sentence can become a cultural virus, spreading through millions of minds in hours, mutating as it travels, acquiring symbolic weight far beyond the speaker's intent. The more viral the phrase, the more unpredictable its consequence. What begins as wordplay may become a slogan, a rallying cry, an indictment, or an algorithmic profile flag. Once a phrase escapes into a digital wild, the speaker no longer owns it. The archons, the mobs, and the mimetic engines all claim custodianship. Thus, dissident becomes responsible not only for its meaning, but for its chaotic swarm of meanings produced by the system's interpretive machinery. In this environment, fame is indistinguishable from vulnerability. A ritual of doxing and the sacrament of exposure. Doxing is the modern inversion of ancient banishment. Ancient banishment rituals, instead of casting a criminal out of the city is cast into the home of the targeted individual. The doxed one becomes a public altar upon which strangers deposit their rage, paranoia, boredom, and ideological anxieties. Exposure is a spiritual ordeal, for it erodes the boundary between private self and public avatar, collapsing the two into an arena where adversaries feel licensed to intrude. Crowds do not assemble because of conviction, but because of velocity. Once a frenzy gathers momentum, people participate not out of hatred, but out of ambient hysteria. The doxed individual undergoes forced apotheosis and crucifixion simultaneously, exalted as a symbol, destroyed as a person. The assassin's shadow and the architecture of fear. An assassination attempt is not merely an act of violence, but an algorithmic message. You have reached the threshold at which ideas become dangerous. Fear becomes a third interlocutor in every conversation, shaping tone, pacing, and disclosure. The dissident begins to speak with ghost at his shoulder. Yet this same fear sharpens clarity. One learns what is essential and what is ornamental, for only essential convictions survive the proximity of death. The dissident who has forced a weapon aimed at his life acquires an aura the machine cannot easily erase. Martyrdom attempted is mythology begun. But he must never confuse survivorship with sanctity. Mere endurance is not a mandate for power. The question of who should rule, the question who should be president, is not a matter of personality but of archetype. Citizens ask which mythic force they wish to install at the center of the republic's symbolic engine. Every candidate is a vessel for collecting belonging. The builder, the disruptor, the oracle, the martyr, the administrator, the trickster. To choose a leader is to choose a mythology. The electorate votes not only for governance but for narrative. Thus, the Promethean dissident must evaluate leaders not by charisma but by their gravitational effect on the civic cosmos. A leader capable of redirecting destiny is rare. A leader capable of restraining his own mythology is rarer. And that is the end of part 3 of the Recursive Radicalism of Nick Fuentes. I am Abe Zucca. You can check out my art at zuccagallery.com. Yes, my YouTube channel sucks. It only has 120 subscribers. You could pass judgment on me and say that this form of content is stupid and boring, and that's fine. But I've come to realize that these readings may act like MK Ultra passwords and activate people like weird machines of the subconscious. But once again, I am Abe Zucca. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys later.